What if your best customer could be punished for buying from someone else? You own a watermill in medieval England. From the riverbank, it looks like a straightforward machine. Water turns a wheel. The wheel turns stones. Grain enters, flour leaves. Farmers need what you sell, so the business seems almost modern. Build something useful, charge a fair price, and compete for customers. But there is a problem. Your mill is expensive. The river is unreliable. The machinery tears itself apart a little more every day. And every household in the village already owns the cheapest competitor imaginable: 2 handstones and enough patience to grind grain at home. So why would anyone sink a fortune into your wheel? The answer is not hidden in the gears. It is hidden in a right attached to the manor, a right that can turn the village harvest into your recurring income. Before we open that account, you have to buy the machine that makes it possible. You cannot place a watermill wherever the scenery looks pleasant. You need a fall of water, enough flow to turn the wheel, and legal control over the banks. A simple wheel sitting directly in a stream may work, but reliable power usually demands much more. You divert part of the river at a weir. You cut an artificial channel called a leat. You regulate it with sluices. If the natural flow is weak or uneven, you hold water in a mill pond, release it toward the wheel, and send the spent water back through a tail race. That means your asset is not one building. It is a managed landscape. The weir, pond, banks, channels, and gates are all parts of the machine. A breach upstream can stop production before a single gear breaks. A neighbor who controls water above you can damage the business without touching your door. Then comes the mill house. The wheel turns an axle. The axle drives gearing. The gearing turns 1 or more pairs of stones. Grain must be lifted, stored, fed between the stones at the correct rate, cooled, collected, and bagged. Too wide a gap leaves coarse meal. Too narrow a gap burns the flour and damages the stones. The power comes from the river, but the product still depends on judgment. By the 14th and 15th centuries, an English watermill could cost at least £20 to build, and a large one could cost £100 or more. Those figures are not a universal medieval price list. Place, date, capacity, and waterworks matter, but they establish the scale. This is not a peasant buying a clever tool. This is capital infrastructure. And the spending does not end when the wheel first turns. Water attacks everything you own. Timber swells, cracks, and rots. Banks slump. Silt fills channels. Floods throw debris against the weir. Drought leaves the wheel still. Millstones wear and must be dressed so their grooves keep cutting rather than polishing the grain. Wooden teeth in the gearing take the shock of every irregular turn. One estimate for late medieval English mills puts annual depreciation near 10% of capital value. Treat that as an informed reconstruction, not an invoice from every mill. Even so, the point is brutal. A mill can look permanent while consuming a large share of itself each year. You therefore need a miller. He is not merely the man who carries sacks. He reads the water, controls the sluices, listens to the stones, adjusts the feed, and keeps flour from becoming smoke. He also stands at the most sensitive point in the village food chain, the moment when someone else's brain becomes a smaller bag of flour.
You can operate the mill directly, employ him, or lease the entire operation. Lords often leased mills to working millers for a fixed cash rent. That converts uncertain daily tolls into a predictable payment for you. It also shifts much of the labor and some repair risk onto the operator. The miller now has to collect enough grain to pay your rent, maintain his household, and keep the machinery alive. This is where suspicion enters the business. Customers do not watch every kernel pass between the stones. The miller measures the toll, and the toll is commonly taken in kind. If his measuring dish is generous to himself, or if flour disappears between intake and return, the customer may never prove where it went. Medieval stories made the greedy miller a familiar villain for a reason. But distrust creates another problem for your investment. If villagers dislike your operator, why not grind at home or walk to the next mill? Mechanized milling offers real value. Turning a hand quern is slow, physical work, often performed inside the household. A watermill processes far more grain while freeing hours for farming, brewing, textile work, or rest. It can also produce a more consistent result. Some people willingly pay for that efficiency. But willingness is not the same as certainty. A household can keep a hand mill. A prosperous farmer can choose a rival. Someone can carry grain beyond the manor boundary. A second entrepreneur can build downstream and offer a smaller toll. If your income depends only on preference, you have built an expensive machine in a competitive market. The village may be small, harvests fluctuate, roads turn to mud. A poor year reduces the volume passing through your stones at exactly the moment repair costs remain fixed. This is why the right beside the mill can matter more than the mill itself. Across much of medieval England, though not everywhere, a custom developed known as suit of mill. Certain tenants were bound to bring their grain to the mill of their manorial lord and pay for grinding, usually with a share of the grain or meal. In some places, using a private hand mill was forbidden. Building a competing mill could bring a case in the manorial court. Carrying grain elsewhere could lead to a fine. Your customer base is no longer created only by service. It is created by tenure, custom, and enforcement. Now the water wheel looks different. It is not simply labor-saving technology. It is a checkpoint placed between harvest and bread. The payment is called multure, a toll commonly removed from the grain before or during milling. The rate varies by lordship and period. Surviving evidence places many English milling tolls somewhere between 1/10 and 1/24 of the grain processed. A documented Yorkshire example uses 1/20. A royal right associated with Chester claimed 1/15. Do not flatten those into one medieval rate. They are examples of a system whose local terms mattered. But imagine your account book at 1/20. For every 20 sacks legally directed through the mill, 1 sack's worth becomes toll before expenses and division with the operator. You do not need to predict the price of flour to understand the attraction. Your revenue rises with the amount of grain processed. A larger harvest sends more through the wheel. A growing village brings more households under the stones. This is closer to a royalty on throughput than a modern retail sale. You are not buying grain, guessing at the market, and hoping to sell flour for more. You are taking a fraction while other people transform their own harvests into food.
The arrangement can also strengthen the rent you demand from the miller. A lease backed by compulsory custom is worth more than a lease exposed to free competition. Research on medieval Kent points in the opposite direction. Where landlords did not enforce suit of mill values, effectively their profitability, were generally lower than in areas where customers were compelled to attend. That comparison reveals the asset hiding in sight plain. 2 mills can contain similar stones and stand on similar streams. One has customary control over local grain. The other has to persuade every customer. Their engineering may be equal, their economics are not. But a monopoly that exists only on parchment is not a monopoly. Someone has to enforce it. In 1274, the Abbey of St. Albans confiscated hand mills from tenants who had used them in defiance of the abbey's rights. The episode is almost too visually perfect. Domestic millstones gathered by the institution that wanted grain directed through its own machinery. The conflict did not end there. Townspeople challenged the abbey's control for generations. A hand mill was not just a household object. Under the wrong custom, it was lost revenue made of stone. Enforcement could take several forms.
The manor court could fine a tenant. The mill lease could require the operator to identify people who carried grain elsewhere. A rival mill could be accused of drawing custom that belonged to yours. Even the land itself could carry the obligation, binding whoever occupied it rather than one named individual. This makes your business partly legal administration. You need records of which tenants owe suit, which grain is covered, what toll is customary, and what exceptions apply. A vague claim invites resistance. An abusive miller gives the entire village a reason to coordinate against you. And there are limits to your power. The monopoly usually comes with an obligation to provide the service. Later records preserving the custom commonly allow customers to go elsewhere if the manorial mill is broken or cannot process their grain within a specified period, often 24 to 48 hours. French legal material likewise asks when subjects may remove their grain if the banal mill fails to grind it promptly. So the right does not let you abandon the machinery. It makes maintenance more important. Every hour the wheel stands still threatens both the toll and the legitimacy of demanding it. Now open the operating ledger. On the income side, you have multure, lease rent if a miller operates the site, and perhaps additional work when water power is adapted to other processes. Grain grinding remains the core business in our period and setting. Later, and in suitable places, water power can drive fulling equipment, hammers, or other machinery. But adding a second use may compete for the same flow that keeps local bread production moving. On the expense side, you have timber, stone, iron fittings, millstone transport, skilled repair, dredging, bank work, and the constant management of water. A new wheel does not help if the leat is choked. A perfect set of stones earns nothing in drought. A repaired weir may wash out in the next flood. Then there is loss. Grain spoils in damp storage. Flour dust is combustible. Rodents take their own unofficial multure. A dishonest operator steals from customers and damages your reputation. A dishonest customer hides grain or claims it was grown outside the obligation. Measuring disputes turns small fractions into recurring hostility.
Capacity creates another trap. Compulsory customers can arrive together after harvest. If the queue becomes too long, custom may permit them to leave. Expanding capacity costs money, but refusing to expand can release the customers your right was supposed to guarantee. Your moat is therefore conditional. The manor can direct grain to you, but only if the mill performs. That condition helps explain why ownership and operation are often separated. You, the lord or institutional landholder, control the site and the customary right. The miller leases access to both. He supplies expertise and absorbs daily conflict. His fixed rent pays you before his own profit is known. It is an elegant arrangement until harvest, water, and politics all move against him at once. Suppose the year is wet enough to damage the banks but dry enough later to slow the wheel. Repair costs rise. Throughput falls. Tenants complain that their grain is waiting. The miller still owes rent. If you lower his rent, your predictable income disappears. If you refuse, he may neglect repairs or abandon the lease. If you prosecute every household that goes elsewhere, you admit that the service itself is failing. Now add a bad harvest. A toll taken as a fraction protects you from some price risk, but not volume risk. 1/20th of a small crop is still small. In a famine, enforcing a grain toll becomes politically explosive. The machine sits at the point where private revenue meets survival. The 14th century adds a larger shock. After the Black Death, labor, tenancy, and bargaining power changed. Historians have documented a decline in suit-of-mill litigation after the mid-century plague, even though the custom survived in many regions for centuries. A legal right can outlive the social conditions that made it easy to enforce. Regional variation matters just as much.
Suit of mill was strong in parts of northern England and on many religious estates. It was weaker elsewhere, and apparently never enforced in Kent in the same way. Domestic hand milling persisted where households had greater freedom. There was no single medieval business plan spread evenly across a continent. That is why your purchase must include due diligence. Not just, does the river turn the wheel? Ask, which tenants are actually bound? By what custom? Has it been enforced? What toll is recognized? Who maintains the weir? When may customers leave? Can someone build downstream? Is the mill leased, and who pays when the bank collapses? Without those answers, you may own an impressive building and an argument. With them, you own something more powerful. The medieval watermill combines three assets. First is physical capital, the wheel, stones, gears, and waterworks. Second is operational knowledge, the miller's ability to make an unstable natural force produce consistent flour. Third is institutional power, the recognized claim over who must attend and what fraction they surrender. The first asset makes milling possible. The second makes it reliable. The third makes the revenue repeat. This is the reason the title of ownership can mislead you. You might think the machine takes a cut of every harvest because it is efficient. Efficiency helps customers accept the toll, but the strongest version of the business takes its cut because the local rules direct covered grain through one set of stones. The payoff is not that medieval people were foolish enough to tolerate a primitive monopoly. The mill saves enormous labor. Large-scale grinding is genuinely useful. The Lord provides infrastructure few households could build alone. Customers receive speed and capacity. The abuse enters when useful infrastructure and coercive privilege become difficult to separate.
That tension keeps the system alive. If the mill offered nothing, resistance would be constant. If the service alone guaranteed demand, confiscating handstones and prosecuting rival milling would be unnecessary. The business works because convenience and compulsion reinforce each other. You are never simply buying a better machine. You are buying a river system, a skilled operator, a place in the food chain, and, where custom allowed it, the right to make a community use them. The wheel turned because water fell. The money arrived because grain had nowhere else it was supposed to go. If you want the next set of historical accounts opened at this table, take your seat by subscribing. The ledgers stay open, and there is always another asset whose real owner was not the person you expected. This is Owning History, where history opens its account book.